stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Streaming on CBS News.
A jury in New York has found that Trump sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll.
You know, on February 1st, I went to see the president, sat down with them. Unfortunately, it's taken 97 days to finally come back.
They will be deployed to hot spots along the border to intercept, to repel, and to turn back migrants who are trying to enter Texas illegally.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We are tracking two significant stories this evening. A verdict in the civil rape trial against former President Trump in Manhattan, and President Biden's meeting with congressional leaders at the White House at this hour about the debt ceiling. We'll go to the White House and Capitol Hill in just a moment. But first, a Manhattan jury has found former President Donald Trump liable for sexually abusing and then defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. The unanimous verdict was reached after about 3 hours of deliberations. Trump has been ordered to pay $2 million in damages on the battery charge, $3 million in damages on the defamation charge. Jurors rejected a third charge of rape. Graham Cates has the latest from New York.
A jury found former President Donald Trump liable for sexually abusing the writer E. Jean Carroll in a New York City department store in the mid-1990s. The jury awarded Carroll $5 million in damages. Carroll said that she bumped into Trump in a Bergdorf Goodman in New York as she was about to leave it, and that they ultimately walked through the store, engaging in at first playful, joking banter before this light scene turned dark when he assaulted her in a dressing room. Carroll's team called 11 witnesses during the trial, some who testified that she confided to them in the moments and day after the alleged attack. But Trump called no witnesses and did not show up at the trial at all. Ultimately, one of Carroll's attorneys told the jury, "You have to decide whether all 11 of our witnesses committed perjury or whether Trump is lying." And the jury ultimately found that it was Trump who was lying.
Graham Cates, we thank you. It's been about 3 months since the president and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy last met about raising the debt ceiling. Democrats, as you've probably heard, want the debt ceiling to be increased without any conditions attached at all. Republicans, particularly those in the House, are pushing for spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt ceiling and thereby avoiding default. Time is running out to address this situation. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen estimates the nation could face default as soon as June 1st. Biden spoke to reporters as the White House meeting began.
My colleagues and I will be saying things to you after this is all over. But in the meantime, just wanted to welcome you, let you know what we're doing. We're not going to take any questions now. We're going to get started. We're going to solve all the world's problems.
For more on this, Weijia Jiang and Scott McFarland join us. Weijia is CBS News' senior White House correspondent. She's on the North Lawn. Scott is, of course, CBS News congressional correspondent. I just want to let the audience know, in the midst of this conversation, if any of the negotiators come to the microphones outside the White House, we'll cut to that. But absent that, we're going to talk to Scott and Weijia. So, Scott, give us, our audience, your soundings today from lawmakers on the situation.
Just before the meeting at the White House began, there was this unsatisfying debate over what to call the meeting. And the White House doesn't want to call this a negotiation. Democratic leaders don't want to call this a negotiation because doing so removes them from the ground they're trying to stand on during this standoff, that you don't negotiate over the debt ceiling. You don't play with fire by negotiating over this. Republicans believe with the House-passed bill in the Republican-led U.S. House earlier this spring that this warrants negotiation over spending cuts. So with 3 weeks left, Major, time running short, this began today with the dispute over what to call the meeting. No indication of inroads or of any gulf being bridged.
Ouija, there is an uncomfortable truth for the White House, whether it wants to confront it or not. There are two bodies in Congress, the House and the Senate, and of the two, one has voted to raise the debt ceiling, the House Republicans. I realize, as well you do as well, the White House considers the conditions linked to that raising the debt ceiling unacceptable. But still, House Republicans do come into this meeting, whatever it is called, with the reality that they have voted to raise the debt ceiling. Where does the White House go?
Well, Major, the White House isn't going to publicly go anywhere today with regard to agreeing to what Kevin McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy, is demanding, which is, as we've been talking about, to make it conditional, whether or not the Republicans raise the ceiling, suspend the ceiling. But you are absolutely right that it's unclear behind closed doors what these four men are talking about. More importantly, what these two men are talking about, Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, because it is McCarthy and his caucus that holds the power in this situation. Somebody, and we hate this analogy, Major, but somebody has to blink. Somebody has to give in because both sides have drawn such red lines here, and nobody's getting even close to it to tip a toe over it, let alone walk over it in public. But this is a president who has served as senator before for decades. So this is a president who understands how deals, how compromises are made, and how perhaps you can agree to things that aren't necessarily made public. And we don't know what's happening behind those doors. What we do know is that both sides agree that this would be catastrophic for the economy, not only the U.S. economy, but for the world economy. All that, though, aside, the White House's position publicly is that they are not budging at all. There is no room here for negotiation, that this is just simply another opportunity for the president to paint a picture of how dire the situation would be if the debt ceiling is not raised, which, by the way, is no different from what he's been doing for the past 3 months, no different from the meeting they had back here in February.
Scott, to Ouija's point that no one's even got to their point of crossing over that line of agreeing to a negotiation or even a process that would lead to negotiations, do you have any sense on Capitol Hill that members are thinking about what could pass if there was a negotiation, and therefore what both bodies, independent of one another, of course, could ultimately accept? Is there anything even leaning in that direction?
Yeah, let me give you the latest state of play from both parties, from all the sources with whom we spoke today, including in the last few minutes. Let me start off with the Democrats, who have talked openly about should the president sit down and try to cut a deal? Should he yield and try to deal with Kevin McCarthy? At this point, there is one prominent Democrat urging that vocally. Take a listen to West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin.
Praying for a final outcome, which is good.
Do you think that the administration is using the right strategy here?
Oh, I think I've been very clear on that. You have to negotiate. You have to negotiate.
We've spoken to other Democrats about whether the White House could do something unilaterally, invoking the 14th Amendment to ensure the government doesn't fail on its debts. Top Democrat on the House Budget Committee tells CBS News that type of provocative step would likely cause the same type of market and economic impact, or a similar one, to a simple default. Republicans, meantime, think they've got that leverage from that House-passed bill. And Major, one House Republican of the Freedom Caucus tells me he has received 0 constituent calls about this issue. Not a lot of pressure from back home to yield.
Ouija, what degree is the White House talking about what Scott referred to a second ago, this 14th Amendment approach, where basically the White House would argue under the 14th Amendment, you can't default. So if Congress hasn't acted, we're going to continue to spend, and we're going to be consistent with that amendment, and then force Republicans essentially to go to federal court and sue on behalf of defaulting. Is that a serious option at the White House?
It's not something that they have taken off the table when asked about this, but it is not something that they are really willing and open to talking about, because their strategy right now is to keep their eye on the ball, is to really paint a picture for the American people that this is squarely the Republicans to blame if it doesn't happen. So they don't want to talk about any other options that the president may or may not have. They don't want to talk about a potential threat to say, hey, if you're not going to do this, we're going to do it anyway, and go above the constitutional, what they would say, the constitutional obligation of Congress to do this, because he can do it through executive power. They are trying to remind people that, this is very simple. This has been done so many times before that it is something that should not be up for debate. The fact is that it is up for debate. And if, Major, the debt ceiling is not raised and the U.S. cannot pay its bills, guess whose economy it is? It's the president's economy, which is something they're also very well aware of, especially heading into 2024, knowing how fragile he is right now.
Scott, let me ask you before we go ever so briefly to summarize Capitol Hill response, so far as you've been able to gather it, to the civil verdict in Manhattan today against former President Trump.
Two reactions worth noting from Senate Republican leadership. John Cornyn of Texas told CBS News he simply doesn't think Donald Trump can get elected president. Quite a statement from Senator Cornyn. John Thune of South Dakota says America is going to have to decide whether it wants to deal with, quote, all the drama. After this verdict and the other investigations, not exactly a robust endorsement from top Senate Republicans for Donald Trump tonight.
Scott McFarland, Ouija Jane, we thank you very, very much. With the pandemic-era border policy known as Title 42 set to expire Thursday, what kind of immigration policy, if any, will replace it, and how can the people living at the border prepare for what comes next? Former Texas Congressman Will Hurd joins us to discuss this and much, much more. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way. Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
CBS Mornings. An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're gonna tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We go to stories because we can bring someone to that story. That human connection is incredibly important. The news doesn't have to be depressing.
What do you love about running? Energy!
It can be uplifting.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell are speaking to reporters at the White House following the meeting with President Biden on raising the debt ceiling. Let's listen.
And find a way that we can curb this increasing debt that is affecting every American family with inflation. And now 3 banks of our 4 largest banks have closed, are in a debt problem. Nothing has changed since then. The only thing that has changed is the House has raised the debt ceiling and passed the bill. That's why we had a meeting today. Everybody in this meeting reiterated the positions they were at. I didn't see any new movement. The president said the staff should get back together, but I was very clear with the president. We have now just 2 weeks to go. If Chuck Schumer could pass something, we'd go to conference right away and solve that. But I don't think Chuck Schumer can pass anything. They haven't dealt with it. Unfortunately, the president has waited 97 days without ever meeting. Every day I asked, could we meet? And he said no. The House has raised the debt ceiling in a responsible manner, curb our spending at the same time, bring us economic growth. And I asked the president this simple question. Does he not believe there's any place we could find savings? He signed a bill that the House passed, became law, that the pandemic is over. We have $50 to $60 billion that have sat out there that's been appropriated for more than 2 years that we could pull back and save the taxpayer money. We could put in growth packages that help us economically, cutting the red tape so we could build things in America again. We could have items that he actually voted for, like work requirements that just passed in Wisconsin with 82% of the vote, to help our supply chain get stronger. I would hope that he'd be willing to negotiate for the next 2 weeks so we could actually solve this problem and not take America on the brink.
Well, that was House Speaker Kevin McCarthy following his meeting along with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell with President Biden on raising the debt ceiling. And as you heard, the most important thing that the Speaker said is we have 2 weeks left, meaning there have to be negotiations, and the process by which to get specific about those negotiations from the Speaker's point of view has to begin fast. For more on this story and many other topics, I want to bring in former Texas Republican Congressman Will Hurd. He joins us from Austin, Texas. Former Congressman, Will, all those apply. Good to see you.
Hey, Major, it's great to be with you, man.
So, if you were in the House Republican conference right now, would you be standing foursquare with Speaker McCarthy in this default showdown with the president?
Well, I don't think we should have a showdown, but McCarthy is right. You know, the House has passed a piece of legislation to move, and the conversations around what should be done we should have been having this more than just 2 weeks before we probably hit the debt ceiling. Unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., things only get done at the very last minute. And so this is the usual brinkmanship that needs to happen. But a bunch of things can be true at the same time. We can't default on our debt. Like this would be disastrous to our economy. It would have greater implications around the world. The Chinese government would try to take advantage of this and try to get more people to stop doing trading in the dollar because they would use this to say that you can't trust the Americans. And we should also be, reducing our debt and the deficit. We can't be spending $1.5 trillion more than we're taking in, and we should be able to address all those things at the same time. But it's a requirement of our leaders coming together and coming up with solutions on doing that. And this dialogue needs to continue. And I hope they meet every single day between now and the debt ceiling gets increased.
Congressman, when you were in the body, you spent a lot of time focused on immigration, not just as a practical matter, but because it was important to your constituents. Title 42, a health care measure imposed by the Trump administration and kept by the Biden administration as a border control piece of policy, expires Thursday. What do you expect to happen after that date? And how would you describe the current situation in your state?
Well, the current situation is a crisis, and it's been that way since the last administration, and it's gotten worse under this administration. Another terrible policy that President Biden continued from the previous administration, the Trump administration, was treating everybody that comes into the country as an asylum seeker. Not everybody qualifies for asylum. Being approved for asylum requires you to be part of a protected class, and your government has to show, you have to prove that your government is persecuting you because you're part of that protected class. This treating everybody as an asylum seeker is what has led to 6.5 million people coming into our country illegally since Joe Biden came into office. It's a crisis. It's impacting our communities. It's impacting philanthropic organizations that are taking care of all these folks that are now in our care. And this is only going to get worse. When you look at what the human smugglers are doing, human smugglers are using this as an advertisement to say, hey, now's the time to come to America. And so we're going to see an increase, I think, like we've never seen before. And unfortunately, this administration is not prepared for this increase. And there are things that the administration and this Department of Homeland Security can be doing right now without Congress in order to address this crisis. And unfortunately, they're not doing them.
The governor of your state has referred many times in the aftermath of mass shootings in Texas to the need to address mental health. It has become his most frequently cited defense of not dealing with access to guns in any restrictive way. Are you comfortable with that approach? And do you believe Congressman Hurd that mental health is the only question that looms large over mass shootings in America, specifically those in Texas?
Well, look, we know the metamorphosis of a mass murderer, right? And mental health is one of them, but also access to weapons is another. This is why I think we should have universal background checks. This is why we should raise the age of purchasing long guns to 21, which it is to buy a handgun. We have to address the mental health issue as well. We know a lot of these mass murderers had some childhood trauma. We know there's some triggering events. We also need to make sure that law enforcement is prepared if all these other things fail to happen. Look, I had an A rating from the NRA when I was in Congress. But I also listen to groups like Moms Demand Action, and the fact that half of our teenagers in the United States of America are afraid to go to school because they're worried about getting shot is crazy, and it's something that we shouldn't accept. And so there's no one solution that would have solved or prevented what happened in Allen, Texas a couple of days ago, which would have prevented Uvalde or El Paso a number of years ago or Sutherland Springs. But we should be actively doing a number of issues, and it's everything like I just outlined, in order to deal with this crisis, because our parents shouldn't be mourning the death of their children, and we should be doing everything we can. And again, this is why we elect officials. We elect them to solve problems and to work together and to compromise and bring things forward, not just give hollow words.
Two-part question before I let you go, former Congressman Hurd. One, any reaction to the civil verdict against former President Trump in Manhattan today? And how seriously are you considering a run for the Republican nomination in 2024?
Sure. Look, America is better than this. We can't have a convicted sex abuser, someone that we know lost. Donald Trump had lost the House in 2018. He lost the Senate and the White House in 2020. He prevented a red wave from coming in 2022. You add more baggage to him with being now a convicted sex abuser. America's better than this. The Republican Party is better than this. And if we're going to make sure that this century continues to be an American century, we need leaders that are going to be able to win in November. And unfortunately, that's not going to be Donald Trump. And Major, I will say about my future, I've been lucky to serve my country in a number of ways, whether it was overseas as a CIA officer or to represent my hometown in Congress. If there's ways for me to serve my country again, I'm going to keep those options open.
Fair to say you're considering it?
I'm considering a number of options in order to serve my country. That's for sure.
Former Congressman Will Hurd, thanks so very much.
Thanks, Major.
With the 2024 election cycle moving toward being in full swing, we look at the most consequential races that could determine the balance of power in Washington. It's a big topic. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur, Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. As President Biden pursues re-election, his approval rating, bad news at the White House, well, it's hit a new low. Jennifer Horn and John Cott join us now to discuss. Jennifer is a senior fellow at the University of Chicago and previously served as chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. John is a partner at Capitol Counsel and a former advisor to both Senator Chris Coons, Democrat, Delaware, and Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia. Jennifer, let me start with you. I want to play a little bit of a Super PAC ad sponsored by Liz Cheney's Super PAC to air in New Hampshire about the former president. Let's take a quick listen.
Donald Trump has proven he is unfit for office. Donald Trump is a risk America can never take again.
Jennifer, how do you expect that to land in New Hampshire?
Well, with Republicans, certainly won't land particularly well. The Republican Party in New Hampshire, certainly the leadership and the primary base, the activists, are all in for Donald Trump, and they have been since 2016. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon, in spite of the legal, in spite of the outcome of the civil case that we saw today. Now, for Liz Cheney, in New Hampshire, it's independent voters who really determine the outcome of elections. Republicans and Democrats are always very close in numbers as far as registered voters, but independents almost always exceed either Republicans or Democrats. And that's a status that's kind of given a home for those Republicans who are dissatisfied with Trump. I think it's going to land well with those voters, who could really make a difference in the general election in particular.
But just to clarify, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, Jennifer. You don't believe among base activist Republican voters in New Hampshire, today's civil verdict in Manhattan will have any negative effect for the former president?
I really do not. I don't think it'll have much effect for the president anywhere in the country, frankly. He's got that 28 to 33% of support amongst Republican primary voters. It has been firm almost since the first day that he came down that stupid escalator in New York City. And it hasn't really changed since then. It's the same in New Hampshire as it is in the rest of the country. And I don't think that what we saw today is going to move them. Everything that this president has done over the last 6 or 7 years, everything he has said has not moved them. I don't think this is going to have any impact. Whether or not that changes with other investigations and, what might come out of that over the next 12 months, I don't know. But I don't think what we saw today will probably have any significant impact on his numbers.
And to Jennifer's point, there are, of course, other investigations. John, I want to ask you how, it's one poll, but the Washington Post, ABC News poll, for whatever it's worth to political insiders, matters a lot in the Washington conversation broadly. How bad a news was it for the White House and President Biden?
I don't think it's bad news. Look, he's had some
It's good news.
It's not good news, but he's had some rough poll numbers. But look, he just announced his campaign. He's going to be getting out there more. He's going to be telling the story to the American people of what he's done for the last 2 years, which if you just look at it, he probably is the most impactful president of my lifetime in passing legislation. He now has to get out and sell that to the American people. He has to get the surrogates out there doing it. He has to have all the labor unions. The AFL-CIO is going to play a huge role in this campaign, explaining how great he's been for working-class Americans. And
it would also help if people could see the practical results.
Right, and I think you're going to start seeing that. Look, when legislation passes, we all celebrate in D.C. We have parties, we sign the bill. That doesn't actually do anything. It takes a number of months, years sometimes, for that money to get out there and those projects to start happening. And I think that's what you're going to see the campaign based around of, basically a scoreboard campaign. Look at all the things that I've accomplished. So when he goes to Michigan, he can stand in front of a new facility that's opening. When he's in New Hampshire, he can say, I signed this legislation into law, and that's why these jobs are created. That's why this school is better. That's why this road is paved and allowing for more businesses to come in. And that's where I think you'll start seeing the poll numbers tick up. He's just got to get out and sell it.
One consistent pattern in polling data for the last several months has been the country is not psyched up about a Biden-Trump rematch.
Sure.
In Washington, as you well know, John, there's this conversation about would Senator Manchin run as a third-party candidate in that scenario? Would he?
I have no idea. I think
what is your sense?
I think he actually is undecided about what he wants to do. I think
intentionally coy.
I think it comes off as intentionally coy, but one thing I know about him is he doesn't like to focus on politics. He much prefers to focus on legislating. So for him, when the 2022 election ended, his election didn't start. He just saw that as another year that he gets to legislate. So I don't think he's actually focused on it right now. And look, he always told me the thing he decides every day and before every vote is, does it help West Virginia? Does it help the country? And I think at the end of the day, he's going to decide that, but it won't be until December or January. So people can keep asking him. He's just not going to have a decision till then. It'll frustrate people. I know it. But
I for one, will keep asking, and probably
sure
John Cobb remained somewhat frustrated. But
Yep.
I appreciate the time. Jennifer Horn, I also want to thank you. Thanks to you both for joining us. That does it for today. You probably know this, but I want to remind you just the same. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And you're also streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.